Hello, dear friends, and welcome to another What is Spiritism program. We are blessed to be here tonight to continue our learning journey with Kardec. In the prologue of the book What is Spiritism, Kardec explains that his intention in writing this phenomenal book is not only to help us study the fundamental principles of Spiritism more profoundly in a very didactic manner, but it is also for us to be able to address the newcomers and all the skeptics. Specifically tonight, we will continue our exploration of the skeptic's view towards Spiritism. Our focus will be on the opposition of science and the erroneous explanations given by the skeptics towards mediumship or regarding mediumship. So, to join us in this journey tonight, we would like to invite two friends that have a very scientific mind themselves. Luiz Lima is the first to join us tonight. Hello, Luiz.
Hi,
Thank you for
Carol.
joining
Thanks
us.
for
How
having
are
me tonight.
you?
I'm good. I'm good. Great to be here tonight to contribute.
Wonderful to be here. Yes. You are joining us all the way from Florida. Thank you,
Morning.
Luis.
You're welcome,
Yes,
Carol.
can you tell us a little bit about your program on Kardec Radio?
Yeah, we do host a program right here on Kardec Radio every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. It's called Spiritism, A Closer Look. And every week we take a topic and we explore the topic. It's a short 30-minute program, so it doesn't get too boring per se, right? But we bring in, sometimes we bring guests and people with us, but that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Luis. And
You're welcome.
now we would like to bring our other friend, Marco Magalhaes, joining us all the way from Canada. Hello, Marco.
Hello, everyone. A pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
You are a great friend of Kardec Radio and Spiritism. You have done many programs and you are very much involved with the Spiritist Society of Toronto, right?
That's
Would you
correct.
like
Yes,
to tell us a bit more about all that you do, Marco, please?
absolutely. I'm happy to. So I've been participating in Kardec Radio since it started. Basically, I remember, when it all started, I first met Vanessa, and me and Joyce have been hosting programs for some time and contributing. And here in Canada, I actively participate at Toronto Spirit Society. I also help other Spiritist centers too with lectures in English, and I'm also part of the Canadian Spiritist Council, also helping spread the word and help Spiritism in Canada.
Wonderful. So, thank you, dear friends, for joining us in this effort, which is precisely what Kardec had in mind to spread the word, spread the light of the truth, as Marco said. And it is remarkable how Kardec addresses the light of the truth in a question and answer format, almost guessing questions that everyone has in mind. The first question that Kardec answers in this particular segment of the chapter is how come there aren't many well educated, highly instructed, learned individuals that understand and embrace Spiritism. You both are learned individuals yourselves
Yeah.
who have a very scientific mind that have embraced Spiritism. So, what are your thoughts on this particular question that Kardec helped us to answer? Marco, would you like to begin, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's a very nice introduction to the discussion. I've been training and working in science for most of my life, and I run a research lab, and I have I've been working in University of Toronto for many years now. And what is I find interesting is that question and answer approach, particularly to this topic, it is a very vivid example of the scientific debate, right? Of the true exposure of ideas and trying to philosophically debate the theme without any preconceptions or any dogmas, and this is so nice to see, right? I think this is really what one of the main things that attract me to Spiritism when I first started studying it is exactly the possibility of openly discuss any topic without any concerns, because faith exactly should be like that, right? As Kardec says very clearly, right?
Exactly. Thank you, Marco. And what are your thoughts, Luiz, with regards to
Yeah, I
this?
think the format, the questions and answers. If you go back in time, actually, let me have a couple of minutes here. We had the pressure of the church for 1,000 and some years, in which the dominant line of thought was theology. So dogmas you cannot answer, you cannot question, you cannot say anything. You just take that as is, as we tell you, and that's it. And then by the 1700s, 1750, philosophy comes back into place. You see, philosophy was part of the old era with the Greeks that got into under the Roman Empire, and that disappeared. The philosophy disappeared. So philosophy is going to come back in the 1750s or so with the Age of Enlightenment and the need to question again. So that's how we got into this question. So for thousands of a thousand, whatever, 1,500 years, we had questions all the way and never had the answers. We never had the answers. And then when philosophy comes back in place, the best way to bring the information is the philosophical way, which is questions and answers. For every answer that you give me, I'm making a subsequent question until we have no more to ask.
Exactly. Well
So
said,
it's
Luis.
appealing.
Well said. Yes. And it's interesting that you said about the philosophical approach, because Kardec answers this very question regarding the lack of understanding from the scientific community by saying that there are many scientists that have joined the understanding of the embraced this philosophy and this science with moral consequences. And Kardec further comments by saying that those who have not yet realized the connection between reason and faith have not done so because they are pretentious. So Kardec tells us that we need to be unpretentious to be able to embrace the connection between reason and faith. What are your thoughts on this? Marco, please.
Great. This is such an important and like fundamental concept, and I think Kardec, when he's answering, when he's answering some of the questions, right? So he'll go through examples, right? Because I think it's a very clear way of helping solve this mystery, this discussion, right? And for example, one of the examples he brings is like. He talks about Galvani, right? So Galvani is a doctor, scientist, physicist, right? So, and it's an interesting story, right? Because Galvani discovered that electricity runs through the body of animals and is responsible for the movement of muscles, right? By putting electrodes on a frog, right? They were able to realize that the frog would move his legs when stimulated with electricity, right? So And then for science, like that's such a shocking concept at the time, right? How can this be possible, right? So Kardec uses that rationale to show exactly, how can such an experiment could be missed by most people, right? If they were not focused, open-minded and focused, like exactly what you said, like if the educated people or the scientists were not carefully paying attention and looking at things that may otherwise have been missed by most people, right? We would not have learned that. Or when the apple fell, right? So
Mhm.
how many people in history have seen things falling from other objects but never really thought about a potential force attracting them, right? Again, because the way you approach the scientific question, if you come with a baggage, if you come with a bias, or if you're like, if you're thinking, not thinking carefully about studying what you see, you're going to miss everything, right? And then you may disagree, and like science disagreed with most of these people, right, when they first published, right? Some of Galvani's experiments were again republished or retested by many other people until they became accepted. So I think that explains really well what Kardec was trying to say, is that what, you got to be humble, you got to be careful and observant, and you have to be open-minded. And if you are open-minded and careful and humble about what you're looking, then you find things that otherwise might be a mystery, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think what you said
Thank
about
you,
being
Marco.
open-minded,
Yes.
uh, open-minded, because think about this: how did we get into quantum physics, which tells us that everything we knew we didn't know. In fact, everything is different from what we originally thought. To get into quantum physics, little by little, of course, that's not a 5-minute thing, but to get into it, all these people, these scientists, Max Planck and all of those, Rutherford, they had to have a very open-minded, they were driven by this open-minded concept that there's something more here, and if I don't open up for more, I'm going to stay small. And that's exactly what they had to do, an open-minded, support this open-minded idea. That's how they got to it.
And I find,
Exactly.
like, Luis, just to complement that, I find it interesting as a scientist, right, that you find very often, that some scientists will work really, really hard to disprove an idea, which is like part of the scientific principle, right? We have to repeat and prove, right, beyond any reasonable doubt that something is happening. To that's kind of how science sees proof of things, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, another basic principle in science is that the more you really know, the more you realize that you know nothing, right? So this is like a basic for everyone in science. Like, we realize that every single little step we do, it means there are like 100 other steps that we realize that we haven't even seen before, right? Because we're not, we're kind of slowly chugging along, right, along that path. So, when you look at Kardec's criticism, and even at the time, and even now, right, people that were talking about the criticism, scientific criticism against Spiritism, is like, when you find something that is so novel, so extraordinary compared to common science methods, right? And he says it very clearly in the chapter, is that you can't use your same ruler, like your same method, right, to prove something that is absolutely unknown. So in other words, like, imagine at the time, I can't just use my basic archaic measuring tools, right, to find radioactivity, right, because I can't, these are not even detectable, right, at that time. So for them, it just didn't exist. And I have this in my mind. It's like, imagine that you're like, 500 years ago, right? And someone would come to you and say, you know what? There's like these subatomical particles that have this very strange pattern of energy, right? And they can actually penetrate and go through everything, and we can't even see or measure them, but they do exist. Like most people would say, you're completely lunatic. You're going
Yeah.
crazy. We're gonna put you on fire like right now because this is like bad, right? So you can see this story repeating itself, right? So now we're seeing, well, wait a minute, maybe there's actually more than what our ability to measure can tell us, right? There you go. There's the spiritual world, right? But we know a hint about it now. Science is helping, but a lot of people say, forget it. This is like makes no sense, right? So that's I
Yeah.
can see Kardec doing that, right? As he's talking to people, which
It's
is
like
great.
Galileo saying, "We don't go around. The sun doesn't go
Yeah,
around us. We go around the
exactly.
sun." Oof!
Yeah, this is just too much,
Lock
right?
him
So
up.
like
Yeah, lock him up.
I can't take that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Precisely what you both mentioned brings me to a quote from Kardec directly from this chapter where he says, "Today, believers are the ones who are being called mad. Tomorrow, it will be the turn of those who do not believe, just as those who believed the earth spun on its axis used to be called crazy." So he's saying what is called crazy today will be considered reasonable tomorrow. It's just a matter
Absolutely.
of uniting reason, observation, and faith together.
That's it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And speaking of an open mind, which is a theme that you both brought about tonight, Kardec also says here that the spirit phenomena, since many trustworthy individuals have studied them, there must be something to it after all, he says. I'm reading directly from the book.
Yeah.
Then he says, an illusion, if you will, cannot have this character of generality. It might bewitch a certain circle or affection, but not the whole world. So let's guard against denying the possibility of the spirit world. So, Luiz, since you do a program entitled Spiritism: A Closer Look, every week you help us explore this spirit world using reason and faith. So, what would you say to this character of generality which Kardec brings about, telling us, affirming to us that no, this is not an illusion, because this is an argument that many skeptics to date make.
They still
Oh,
do.
this is an illusion, right? This argument is still current. So, how would we, what are your thoughts on this,
Well,
Luis?
I think I started Spiritism different than everybody that I know of. I went to, I was, of course, skeptical. I had to be taken by force into a Spiritist center. And I sit there, and the guy was talking, my first time ever on a Spiritist center. So he was talking something from the book Evolution in Two Worlds. So he mentioned something, and I thought it was just interesting at the time. And he said, go to the book and check it out as a reference. He just said, the reference is there. So I got home and I said, that's interesting. So I took the book on that chapter that he said, read like 2 or 3 paragraphs, and said, this is interesting. So I came back to the beginning, and that was the first book that I read. It's Evolution in Two Worlds, which is full of science and weird things especially for its time.
Mhm.
And then I said, all of this, a lot of the things I don't understand, of course. Now I'm beginning, so my first day, my first week in Spiritism, but I said a lot of these things, I can't say no at the same time.
Yep.
If I can't say no, even if it's a nano possibility that it's true.
Mhm.
And I said, let me, get into this thing a little bit more. And because I have a technical background, this technical mindset, it was easy for me to fall in love with the book. And then I said, no, but now I got to know more. Then I have to go to the actual a startup, which is the codification. But for me, you work like this. I can't say no to this. You play devil's advocate and you say, I'm going to try to say no to this. What are my arguments? At one point, you run out of arguments. You don't have one. So, for those saying this is not possible, this is all made up. And so, try to play devil's advocate. Explain why it's not possible in reasonable terms. Don't tell me because I don't believe. This is not reason. This is your opinion, your belief, which is we got to respect, but that's not a reasonable argument. We're talking about something black and white. Explain to me why this is not possible. So do this thing with yourself if you don't believe it. And you're going to be surprised. You're going to find a lot of, I can't say no to this on your perspective.
How about you, Marco? How would you answer to this perspective? Luiz already brought reason and faith together in his answer. How about you?
Yeah. So that's so interesting to hear Luis' story. So I although I've been exposed to Spiritism since very young, I consider that I really started it like when I was actually an adult already. I was actually in New York with Adriano and everyone else there in New York, right? So that's when I really started studying, right? And by that time, I already had a postdoctoral fellowship in science, so I was really like 100% committed in science, right? So I started at a skeptical, like completely, 100%. Like I was like, I know this is people follow this, and there's something about it, right? Exactly like Luis said, there's this little sliver thin layer of something that I don't really know how to explain. So let's try to explain this, right? And then I started basically with a number of questions and really carefully kind of question it, right? And I think Kardec's method, right, the way he approaches the question, it's pretty much reflecting his background in academia, right? So he does have this clear, well-defined rationales with raising hypothesis, and then he develops a negative and a positive hypothesis. In other words, this is true, this is false. He argues both ways, and then he argues what exactly he thinks might be the case, and he explains why. So so if you look at the introduction of the Spirit's book and the Gospel according to Spiritism, you'll talk about that, the moral principles, and then in the introduction to Spirit's book, he goes through that, and then he goes back again at the what's Spiritism, and then he gets back to it. So every book basically he'll bring that back, right? This idea of the rationale and the question, right? And that's exactly what Luis described, which he reads it and is like, well, that makes sense. I can't really argue against this, right? And that free debate of idea, that's really what connected me like deeply to it, right? And a point that similar to Luis is like, I was convinced that, I could not find a contrary argument that could refute, most of the ideas. And then eventually I realized that I didn't know anything. And and then I realized how much trouble I've been through, and how much I had to learn, and then we go through that long road of understanding who we are, and then I'm like, okay, I got it, Kardec, thanks. It's just like it just took me so many years. But here I am. So I mean, I approached it exactly the same scientific approach to it, and I'll tell you, I read the same books over and over when I'm preparing to give lectures and participate. Like every time I read it, I'll always have that aha moment, like in the middle of nowhere, right? That it's just such a nice, it's just incredibly well done. Yeah.
Yes, wonderful friends. It's beautiful to see scientific minds such as your own explaining how reason and faith come together in your own journey. Very, very well done. So, Kardec also tells us that in order for us to get there, to combine reason and faith together, we need to examine Spiritism beyond the superficial and narrow level. This is the only way in which we will understand Spiritism in its essence. And he says observation is also needed in order for us to know that Spiritism, or rather, to come to understand that Spiritism and the communication between the physical world and the spirit world is not a passing fad like it was 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, we see this in Emmanuel's account of the book 2,000 years ago, that there were oracles, right? And that mediumship and the communication between the two worlds were treated as something that they did as a pastime, as a curiosity. And although Kardec welcomes curiosity as a great scientist that he is, as a scholar, right? He says that in order for us to truly understand this view of life, we need to go more deeply in our exploration. So, what would you say to that, Luiz? And what would your recommendation be to someone who is just entering this road that both of you beautifully described?
Yeah, I think throughout the years, going to centers and speaking as a speaker too, I think there's a lot of difficulty in every audience because things are not put in context correctly, or they're not put in context at all. So, for example, really quick, we know from Spiritism that from God, two things emanate: the spiritual principle and the universal cosmic fluid, which in it contains everything, all the seeds of everything that one day is going to be matter. There is no common point between these two. Spiritual principle is here, universal fluid is here. There's no common point, there's no connection point. So, the spiritual principle develops later on. We're not going to explain why, but develops to what we call an intelligent principle and then a spirit. Matter itself is still matter. The carbon atom is carbon atom forever and ever. Hydrogen atom is hydrogen atom. It was 15 million years ago, it still is the same today. So matter doesn't do anything by itself. The acting of the intelligent principle upon matter is what creates the creation. Let's put it this way. So this makes things very clear, which is, who is in charge of studying what? Science studies the side of the fluid, the universal cosmic fluid, but they don't go as much high from the gross matter. They're getting to the next level now with quantum physics, but they study the material principle. What is Spiritism? That's the title of the book, right? Spiritism studies the intelligent principle, which is the other side. We, as Spiritists, never go to a lab, to a physical lab, to a quantum physics lab, to a chemistry lab, to conduct any experiment. Never, ever, ever, ever. Science never comes to our side to understand about the intelligent principle. Never, 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 ever. That's why Kardec makes it very clear in the book of Genesis. He says that Spiritism and science have to go hand in hand. We don't go to the lab as Spiritists. We use the results that science brings to us, but they don't do the same thing with our results. That's where the process is still in development. But this is very clear that things are different. So we study the intelligent principle. We as Spiritists cannot expect, and that's everywhere, and it shouldn't be. should not expect that one day science is going to say, oh yeah, God exists, or oh yeah, the spirit exists. It's not on their realm. They are studying the material principle. They are not studying the intelligent principle. That's us. So when things are put in context like this, it becomes, for me at least, it could be a little bit more easy to define what can be done and expected, what cannot. So there's a lot of this. People want science to, sign, acknowledge with a big signature at the bottom. Oh yeah, this exists or that exists. It's never going to happen because that's outside their scope of work. You know?
As
Yeah,
a
I agree.
scientist yourself, what would you say, Marco?
I can't agree more. I mean, Kardec he says exactly that in the chapter, right? He says, this is not within the science is not within the realm to judge or evaluate based on experiments, what the spiritual principle or the spirit in this case is for, is what's made of and what it does, and it's like it's just like a different realm. And then he goes through the examples, which I love. He'll say, if you need something done in your house, would you have a contractor come in, or are you gonna, talk to, I don't know, someone randomly, like an artist or something, say, come and fix my house. This is just not gonna work, right? It's just like there's a completely different realms. And now talking technically, now speaking, there has been, I think it's important for us to bring this to, right? There has been a number of people trying to investigate in this lab setting some, I would call them unexplainable phenomena, right? That may or may not be intervention spirits in matter and other things, right? So obviously they're absolutely focused on basically the interaction between spirit and matter. That's pretty much all these experiments are set up. For example, like an experiment where they set up like a high resolution, fast, high sensitivity camera on a dark room, and they keep looking for patterns of change in pixel intensity, for example. See, well, something came around here, kind of thing, right? Or where you see a lot now, like how images are formed within a white noise image on a TV, for example, right? And then you got a picture frame and say, well, yeah, it looks like there's a picture here, right? Of course, like we know that, right? We know Kardec is very clear, right? And in every book, like, yes, spirits can interact with matter through their spiritual bodies in any way, shape, or form, time, and space, right? So, now because we don't control what's happening on the other side, like the telephone is only one side, right? So no experiment will be reproducible ever in that realm, right? Unless there's a big plan from the spirituality to drive something specifically for us, like happened with tables that were moving, right? So there is an organized, planned setup, right, to instigate, right, particular individuals to study material effects, right, caused by the intervention of spirits, right? So that's what happened in the Kardec time, right? And exactly like Luiz said, most people, and I would say me included, if I was there at the time, would be like, wow, this is pretty cool. It's like, look, the table is moving around, and that's it, right? Done, right? Just like, you can imagine, at the time, people would think that, they didn't have microscopes, of high resolution microscopes. Now I can look at what we call sub-diffraction limit of light. So I can look at a light microscope at a resolution that is actually below the diffraction limit of light, which is incredible, right? I have those microscopes available in my lab. At the time, the best microscopes available had like a 5x objective, which would increase 50 times, like the zoom level, let's say, of the. So you can see the disconnect here, right? How we don't have tools, basically. Basic science today does not have any particular tool that is capable and designed to actually reproduce experiments in that sense. Exactly because we're not experimenting with matter specifically, right? We're experimenting with an intelligent source, right? That it's completely beyond of our control, right? And people are so excited about seeing these images of spirits in the TV. I'm like, sure, they're all around you all the time. Why do you need a TV to know that they're there? Like, this makes no sense, right? So that's the concept, right? So we're still so stuck into this like physical manifestation of things, right? And closing our eyes completely to this entirety of the spiritual world that's around us, right? So that's good representation of what we're doing still the same. We're still doing the same thing. So
Yeah.
Yes, yes. In the book Memoirs of a Suicide, we learned that from the mentor spirits, we learned that Freud, as a scientist, remarkable scientist, was supposed to take science one step further and was supposed to explain that the relationship between mothers and their sons and fathers and their daughters went beyond the psychological realm and actually related to reincarnatory ties, right? The mentor spirits revealed that that was the divine plan for Freud's particular reincarnation, but he didn't have what it took to take that step while reincarnated at that time. So the mentor spirits indicated in the book Memoirs of a Suicide that he will reincarnate in order to continue his mission exactly where he stopped, so that in the future, we don't know when that is, but they indicate that he will return to Earth in order to pick up where he left off. So we know that we assume that the divine plan is for material science to walk hand in hand with the spiritual science. And
yep.
our dear Vanessa Anceloni has done a series called Health and Spirituality right here on
Mm-hmm.
Kardec Radio, where she purposefully interviews great scientific minds that are courageously pioneering this bridge between the material science and the spiritual science. So we are getting there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's
In
great.
God's
Yeah,
time, of course,
yeah.
right?
And
Yeah.
it's nice, Carol, because I think that's a great example. So, there are so many ways, that you can use a scientific or method approach, right? The scientific method, right, to better understand. It could be in theoretical science, it could be theoretical physics, theoretical math, like now already explained that we may have multiple existences happening at the same time. This is already mathematically shown. We don't have the tools to prove it, right? So the core theory, M theory, string theory, they're all similar in a sense that there are possible coinciding existences. So there are ways of you doing through interventional type of experiments where we allow individuals to see individuals who help more, care more, or do and see what's the health outcomes. There's a ton of research on it. It's pretty clear results. The problem is we're still stuck in the type of observational experiment that we want to see things incredibly crazy happening. See,
Mhm.
that's exactly what Kardec is bringing in this chapter. And that's exactly what he says to the visitor when he asks about it. Because they're like, wow, look, all these bright minds can't really seem to grasp this or believe in this, right? Because our eyes still want to see the table flying, right? That's exactly what our mind is programmed to do still. But if you look at, for example, some of the studies showing how individuals who provide care do so much better, for example, if you care for someone, you actually live longer and healthier than anyone in the same setting. Look at nursing home studies and all of that. So you can't be more perfect than that in an experiment. So you love one another, you're doing great. That Jesus is telling us, like, oh my God, like we know this, right? There's an experiment that proves it, but no one gives a lot of attention because it's not, there's no flashlights coming from the sky and there's no fire coming out of the bushes, right? So we're like, like this is not really, so again, we're stuck into it.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's true.
Yes, you're right. You're right. And speaking of the phenomena that you brought up, our mind being stuck onto the phenomena, when we move to the second segment of the chapter that we are exploring tonight, erroneous explanations, that's exactly what the visitor brings about, because the visitor associates mediumship, the phenomena, with a hallucination. The visitor argues with Kardec, saying, might not mediumistic manifestations be the result of mere hallucinations? And it's because we are stuck onto the phenomena and we are fascinated by it, but yet don't know how to explain it. And Kardec's answer is brilliant, of course, where he said, because he says that it's impossible for this to be a hallucination, since many individuals in different parts of the world, without knowing each other and with different levels of education, are experiencing these manifestations and are being instruments of this manifestation and are providing messages that are highly illuminated in nature, that goes much beyond what they know as individuals.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts, Luiz? What are your thoughts on Kardec's observations?
Yeah, from the clinical medical point of view, when they talk about hallucination, it has to do with a personal experience. It's you. It's whatever they think it is. You have a brain problem, a personality problem. We're not getting into that. But however, it is defined as a personal experience. It's you and only you, nobody else. If you tell me, there's a fish here on the floor right now, that's it. That's it. Everybody else is going to look around. And that's what they go by hallucination. It's a little bit difficult to define hallucination because the word is used in more ways than just this one. So it complicates a little bit because of vocabulary. What Kardec is saying is mediumship. It's something that can be collective. For example, you can see a spirit apparitions, for example. You can have 10 people in a room and the spirit shows up, materializes in there. And that's 10 people looking at and seeing it. So it's not a personal experience. It's not a personal only experience. It's a collective experience. So, you can't go by this and say, oh, but there are 10 crazy people in the room. No, that's not the way it is. That's what Kardec is trying to explain. That if it's something only personal, it could be, we could have an argument there, but it's not. That's not it. That by itself, that eliminates the possibility.
Yes, thank you. And how about you, Marco? How would you respond to that? The argument of mediumship being associated with hallucinations.
Yeah, I mean, this chapter is a short chapter, but it's interesting because the visitor questioning changes like completely from question to question, right? So if you look at the previous chapter, and the previous ones before that we're not discussing today, in some chapters there's like a more linear evolution of the questions, right? Because there's more debate. This one is like the first one is completely shut off, like done, and then he moves completely to something else, and then to something else, just to show the point that absolutely makes no sense, right? So you can't. So hallucination, as we said very well, it's like it's a in a person perspective, right? So it's not. There are some documented cases of group behaviors that are this collective type approach, like collective hysteria, collective behaviors that can occur under situations of stress, right? So that's been cataloged before many times in science. This is a very strange situation that we don't know exactly why it happens, but it do happen. I think probably the visitors is actually referring more towards that type of collective type setup where everybody is so intensely and fervently connected into something that they can all create this collective hysteria mode, which I guess this case called hallucination, which is they believe to see something that is not there, kind of thing, right? But I think Kardec obviously handles it in an incredible way. So basically saying that you can't have like a reproducible, intelligent phenomenon that happens by just a bunch of minds creating it all together. It just doesn't happen because there is an intelligent principle behind it, right? And I think he repeats it nicely in the chapter that for every cause there's a fact, for every intelligent fact there's intelligent cause, right? So it's pretty evident, right, that what we're dealing with, and I think the visitor realizes that and moves to another topic next. But he realizes that, well, or he or she, that there is there is an intelligent principle behind this that cannot be explained by any physical thing or any hallucination or collective hysteria or anything like that. So pretty straightforward, this one.
Yes, and Marco, it's so interesting that you said that the visitor keeps moving from argument to argument because he gets shut down, right?
Shut down.
Yeah.
So here's the next argument that the visitor makes. The visitor says, and I'm reading this directly from the book for us. The visitor says, couldn't this intelligent effect, as you said, Marco, be the response that is always within someone's thoughts? So the visitor is arguing that the intelligent effect is coming directly from someone who is already there in the room, not from a discarnate entity. And Kardec's answer is fascinating because he answers with more questions. I will read some of Kardec's questions and then ask you to comment on them. Okay, Kardec says, how can this theory be reconciled with responses that are outside the intellectual capacity and education of the mediums, that are contrary to their own ideas, desires, and opinions, or that completely baffle the expectations of the onlookers? What about mediums writing in a language unknown to them, or in their own language when they don't even know how to read or write? So Luiz, how does this answer by Kardec strike you?
Fantastic. He shuts down the visitor. Incredible, because that's exactly what it is. How many cases do we have in Brazil? Chico Xavier is one of them. He would write in other languages, something he never knew and never had any contact with. How do you explain mediums that paint to Toulouse-Lautrec when they are not a painter? Mm-hmm. They don't even know how to, hold the pencil. So you see these things that we see all the time, even in surgery rooms, doctors that take decisions, because you got a body there you're operating on, and you got to take a decision because something unexpected came about. And the doctors will just take a route that is not conventional, even for themselves, and that makes it fix up everything. So it's outside the comfort zone of the doctor, but still he had it done for some force guiding them. So all these things, mediums that psychophony, speaking languages that they don't know, writing from back to backwards. all of these things. So these are all
Mm.
arguments that will shut down the visitor. That's how he goes by.
Exactly. How about you, Marco?
Every time I talk about this particular topic, right, of the the beginnings of mediumship, I would call that, like, of study of mediumship and spiritism. I always try to contextualize to things that we're living through now, right? Because I find that most people that are starting, and this is, I'm talking more to someone who's just starting this, right, in
Mhm.
spiritism, right? A lot of people are still attracted by the phenomenon, right? And and a lot of people still demand or require, right, this high level of mediumistic manifestations, right, to imply that they are necessarily true or valid, right? Which is an interesting concept, right? Because we all agree, like, the question for the visitor was, that's it, it's addressed, that there's no way to explain that. You can't have someone who has no relationship or knowledge or of anything all of a sudden create that knowledge out of nowhere in a few seconds. It just can't be done, right? We know there's another intelligent principle, in this case another spirit. There's a spirit, right, that is doing that. Good, right? But what do we take from it? That's what I like to look at. you know, for a lot of people still today, right, that are maybe not a spiritist, but like the idea of spiritism, or sympathetic to it, right? They may actually seek the phenomenon, right? They will come and say, well, I need the cure, like, I need that letter, like, I need the letter, but I need the letter with a signature, because otherwise, it's not going to work. That incredible high level of demand, right? And not allowing us to see what's happening all around us all the time. So I'll give an example. This is exactly what the visitor is doing, right? The visitor is asking this question, but the visitor definitely knows inside his heart or her heart, right, that there's all these things that we can't explain in life. Period. Right? And I don't have explanation for that. Kardec is coming up with an explanation. This is what we do. So we ask God for help. This is more like looking at the moral, bringing the gospel now, right? So we're struggling, we're going through this, we ask for help, we receive this truckload of help dumped on us, like, every single minute, right? But we block it because we're looking at the phenomenon, right? I'll do it, I'll believe it, but it has to be that phenomenon to happen. So I get, oh my God, yes, thank you, I believe so much. No, we're believing in the phenomenon, right?
Mhm.
We're not believing in the message, right? So this is interesting because, this is a concept that I think we in Spiritism need to focus now, particularly more and more, right? The more we talk about this, the more we have to show to people that this is great, but this is nothing compared to what is out there, right? And if we're still and the questioning from the visitor is a great example of that, because it all goes through this phenomena, and worrying about whether it's fluids, if it's electricity, or all these things that they were working on because they were learning about it, right? This is the time, right? This is the time they were learning about magnetism and energies and stuff like that. Now, I think it's time for us to take this example to actually move on, right? And say, this is all great. It's like exactly like the idea that I see all the time now, people showing these images of TVs and radios with sounds, and I'm like, this is great, but we gotta move on, right? And now say, okay, can't so because at the same time, the same people that are looking at this phenomenon and really going so excited sometimes about these things and requiring it so much, they miss the fact that I have to love my neighbor,
Mhm.
which is actually the key of all this, right? Because otherwise,
Yeah.
why are we doing this, right? So anyways, I like to bring that up to a completely different perspective on it.
It was great.
No, it makes sense, Marco. Your comment reminded us of Jesus's dialogue with the doctor of the law, Nicodemus, in the book
Yeah.
Good News, where Nicodemus asks Master Jesus, Lord, how may I follow you? How may I find your kingdom? I have studied everything there is to know. And Master Jesus says, Yes, Nicodemus, you have, but you forgot to feel it. So Kardec uh, triggers our reason and faith exactly to give us instruments in order to feel our own divine nature and the divine nature of others.
Exactly.
Because if we don't feel it, then we are not applying it. This is why it's important, as Kardec repeats in this chapter again and again, that we go more deeply beyond the surface. This is why, so that
Hmm.
these divine tools truly transform who we are, because we have reincarnated to make profound transformations, right? So, with that, I would like to kindly ask you both to share your final thoughts on this excursion with Kardec that we took tonight together. Luiz, do you mind sharing your thoughts?
No, let me say something. Yeah. You see, the whole, it's actually how we started talking about, believing in this and that. So science reaches new frontiers every day. We are
Mhm.
finding things every day with new discoveries, new possibilities. So the frontiers, science finds new things every day. But some of them are still to be discovered, or they are discovered but not yet explained. And like for example, the latest is you science considers a person to be dead when there's no encephalic activity. So encephalic death. When that happens, you can write the death certificate. That's how
Mhm.
we go by law included. And then everything is ready for the paper to be signed. The guy shows up, wakes up, and starts talking of everything that happened throughout the room, the doctors, how they were dressed, what they said, what they discussed. It's called near death experience. So it's something that it's on the horizon for science.
Mhm.
It's something that has been happening. Those are facts. Those are not, something somebody told in a story on a book or so. These are facts that happen in hospitals almost every day. So it's got to be explained. So we science first. They kind of understand what it is. I mean, they see what it is, and then they're going to have to come up with the explanation.
Mhm.
So, same for bacteria. There was a point where we knew nothing about bacteria, so death was this big mystery. Not anymore when it comes to bacteria, because we know what it is, we know how to deal with, we control the process, and we revert diseases and so in that perspective. So this is related to what we were saying in the beginning. Science will have explanation for things, but they need time.
Exactly. And
It's not.
Kardec tells us in this chapter that once the public widely accepts the foundational principles of Spiritism, then it will be just like any other science in a way, because it will be mainstream, right? Marco, your
Right.
final thoughts, please.
So, obviously, this is a thing that I really like to talk about. Now, one thing that I find interesting, that when Jesus, when he was questioned about, what exactly, what, because you can imagine like the disruptive figure of like Jesus coming in, and the way he did things and the way he behaved, and he answered, and he walked, and he moved, and he ended, like I can only imagine how, like, how much of, was happening right at that time, right? But at the same time, he turned around and said, I have not come to destroy the law. In other words, at the time, probably no one understood, including me. I still don't understand very well, but I can kind of get an insight of it, that I now start to understand, that he's trying to say that, well, there is a time and a plan and an organization behind everything. Many of the concepts that we're looking now is the same concept that's been shown before about 5 million times, right? We're just grabbing this little concepts and building this body of knowledge, right? That now Spiritism is looking at from a different perspective, right? So yeah, of course he didn't come to destroy the law, because the law is perfect, because God is perfect. So we know that he's perfectly right, right? So in our concept of science today, and speaking as a scientist, obviously we follow the scientific method, because that's the method that we have right now, and we have to follow that, as it is what we have in hands that allow us to do what we have to do now, right? Now, there will be a time that our scientific method will be updated, right, to include different methods and approaches to test things that right now are completely invisible to our eyes, right? Now, how many people have been through this, before, right? We're just one another wave, one other step on that gear, that system, right? That, we're here to learn, and we're here to build it together with compassion, with care, with respect, right? And I think, I think we're getting there. We're all going to be perfect one day. We know that, right? We have to kind of chill a little bit. So, but at the same time, we have to understand that this march of progress will eventually catch up, right, to the development of the concept of spiritism that we study now. So I think this is kind of how I see it.
Thank you, Marco. And it's beautifully put, because you just summarized the law of progress for us. Progress is a divine law, so we are destined to evolve, as you said. And the comment from our dear friend Daisy also summarizes what you said for us. In other words, she says, "Thank you, dear Daisy. Spiritism is the light of the truth and walks hand in hand with science, reason, and faith coming together, as Kardec says, in all epochs of humanity," right?
That's right.
They can stand the truth, face the truth in all epochs. We are getting there for sure. So thank you both for joining us. We look forward to future partnerships in the good. There's always more to come. Thank you so much. And we invite everyone to continue to stay tuned right here to Kardec Radio, where we are always nourishing our souls. And next week, there will be another program on what Spiritism at this very same time, because we always have much to learn with our dear Kardec. Right, friends?
Right.
Right.
Thank you so much. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.